Welcome to the I Saved You, Now Do the Dishes podcast. I'm author and speaker Carrie Severson. In each episode, I'll share stories and tips from my experience with caregiving and advocacy through my husband's cancer journey. Hi, welcome back to the I Saved You, Now Do the Dishes podcast. I'm Carrie. Nice to see you. Episode 9. I have no idea how many episodes this first season is going to be, so thanks for sticking around. I really appreciate it. If you haven't shared this yet with a friend, I would really appreciate that as well. So last week I left you with the story about Gavin eating pizza at the end of week 3 of his cancer treatment and me falling asleep on the couch to the sound of him chewing. I have so much I want to say. I don't even really know which direction to go in right now. So I'm going to start here. I'm going to start with a tip for cancer caregivers. There are so many things that happen to alter your routine, to alter your reality. Everyday things that a married couple would do together, right? Have a meal together. Intimacy, big one. Quality time. Everything changes at the same time. When it came to meals, Gavin obviously was very affected. He couldn't eat, right? But he had a fear of eating because food was then associated with pain and the amount of pain that he would be in. And so we had to make it a game of sorts. When he ate, we always had to have some sort of cooking competition on television. I wrote a lot about the fact that we were going through Tournament of Champions and Guys Grocery Games, and he would find favorites that he really liked, favorite chefs. And so I would Google one particular chef, and then I'd find all the episodes of that particular, that person was in. And whenever he would sit down to eat, what should have been a 10-minute meal, like a grilled cheese sandwich, took an hour because he was so afraid. It altered my reality as well because I didn't have anyone to have a meal with. He was the only person I was living with. He was my person, right? And I didn't have the energy to cook for myself. And then I didn't want to cook something that I think he would get jealous of eating or, put himself in additional pain. And so I altered everything I was eating. And instead of making myself a warm dish, I lived on sandwiches, and I think I would occasionally put like shredded chicken. I'd spice up some shredded chicken and, warm it up somehow and then scarf that down as quickly as possible before he woke up. But everything shifted. I recently saw an article that AARP sent out, and understandably, I'm in my 40s, mid 40s, late 40s. And I might not be their target audience, but the article said 11 things to know before caring for your spouse. And I was really put off by it. I feel like an organization that does so much research on caregiving should be putting out much better material than it is. So if you write for AARP, if you work for AARP, please send this to them. The number one thing that this particular article said, 11 things to know before caregiving for your spouse. The first one was, you signed up for this. As soon as I read that, I was like, oh my God. Okay, let's dissect. Because the concept of in sickness and in health was something that I actually thought about a lot. We'd only been married for 3 years, and the divorce rates in between caregiver and patient are actually high because it's hard. And so much changes in that dynamic. Again, one of the reasons why I'm really interested in being in this space, shining a light on caregiving specifically, why I wrote a book about it. I saved, Do the Dishes, the other side of caregiving. There's a lot to say about it. No one signs up, expects to be, caregiving for your spouse. When Gavin and I got married in 2020. We've been together since 2018, but he was diagnosed in 2023. We went through COVID, marriage, moving, then cancer, pretty much like within a matter of 3 years. That's a lot for a new couple. I'm actually shocked we're still together. I think it's pretty fantastic that we're still married, to be honest, because so much changed. But we're the best of friends, and we understand each other so much at such a different level than we did before this. But when we said those vows in sickness and in health, I never imagined 3 years later I'd be wheeling him out of the cancer wing unconscious because he's so drugged up from so much pain. And then, couple months later, hand feeding him, which is something I haven't talked about yet. So while, yes, nobody intentionally thinks you're getting married to be this person's caregiver, coming out of the gate with 11 things to know before you signed up for this. In sickness and in health. Yes. So for my caregivers, obviously things are going to change in your life. The meal preparation, a big one. Intimacy is something that also changes that I don't think we talk about enough. But I remember meeting with Gavin's chemo team for the first time. And the chemotherapist is sitting in front of us, and he's doing this almost like a sales technique where he's nodding his head up and down as if, agree with me when I'm about to say. And he goes, "So you're done having kids?" And he's nodding his head up and down. And Gavin and I have talked about this a lot. I've actually miscarried twice. I've had several rounds of failed IVF. And, we got together later in life. I was in my 40s. He was later, and it was one of these conversations that was like, if we're supposed to have a baby, we'll have a baby. But the chemotherapist and the way he did that sat wrong with me. Never addressed me. Talk to Gavin. You're done having kids. And he nods. And, Gavin basically says, well, I have 3, but if we got pregnant, that would be great. And really quickly, the chemotherapist just puts like a big check mark. And it was like a big one, like across the entire page. And then he says, well, the reason I'm asking is because the medicine, the chemo drugs will affect this. And, Gavin went on and he was like, okay, got it. He doesn't remember that conversation again, which is if you live in a one consent state. And I said this last time, if you live in a one consent state, record conversations with medical professionals, because this was a big conversation. It should have been a bigger conversation. And the chemotherapist just went on to the next thing. And the next point of conversation was about Gavin's hearing, because the chemo drugs were also going to impact his hearing. And so he had to go through a number of tests even before chemotherapy started based on how his hearing was and if we wanted to have children. And so after that particular session, after that meeting, I did some research on this specific drug and read through all the material and the fine print of the material that they send you home with about the drug that you're going to get. And sure enough, it said, this drug will create birth defects. And if you are going to be on this drug, you have to agree to not hold the hospital liable for birth defects of a specific, of a child. There was so much. I mean, it was a huge conversation. And no one really pays attention to it. No one puts any energy into it. I was looking for a little bit more, I guess. But again, we don't talk about it. It just gets kind of swept under the rug. So not only are us as caregivers taking on so much more responsibility, our lives are changing, and the possibilities of what lives could have been are changing at a rapid pace. And that was one of the things in this AARP article was, expect to consistently revise your plan. You're always changing, which is something I experienced and something I did agree with. That was, every single second felt like a year, and it would change moment to moment. If you want to experience what it's truly like to live in the present, become a caregiver. I don't think anything could have possibly changed me the way it did other than that. And I had always had, big dreams and high hopes, and I was always living in the future. And then, everything comes crumbling down and you stop and nothing legitimately mattered but that moment. There's a lot of heaviness associated with that experience. And when I think of living in the moment, I think of, childhood and being excited about running around and playing, but living in the moment as a caregiver was very different. Week 4 of Gavin's experience is when everything changed. After he had that pizza that night at the end of week 3, it was actually a Thursday. The very next day was Chinese New Year. And he woke up the next day and his throat hurt because he thought I must have ate too much. But his throat hurt because he was around, finishing a 3rd week of chemo and radiation, and he was pretty much reaching his he was almost close to his halfway point. So at that moment in his journey, his throat should have hurt. It had been blasted 15 times with radiation. So again, caregivers, everything changes, right? You're constantly in this space of what can I do next to support this person? Gavin went from, I want pizza. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited. Yum, to the very next day, I don't want to eat because my throat, now this hurts and I must have overate. So that day on the way home from the hospital, I was like, hey, it's Chinese New Year. Why don't we get some Chinese food? Because he loves Chinese food. And I'm like, oh, let's order your favorites. And I just started rattling off some of his favorite dishes. And he grabs my hand. I'm holding the steering wheel. He grabs my hand. He kisses it and puts it, lets it go. And he's like, I'm so lucky to have you. Thank you so much. I think if I hadn't, and he hadn't ate at all at that point, if I hadn't thought of that, he probably went to ate. Thinking of my feet really quickly. As soon as we get home, I Uber Eats a bunch of stuff. It took him a really long time to eat that dish, and he was in incredible pain. But I turned on, a tournament of champions, and I made a really big deal out of it, and he ate. We're constantly thinking on our feet. We're constantly finding new ways for our person to get through one more moment. And the the pressure of that is immense. Something else this AARP article said was make sure that you're relying on your people. Yes. Yes, yes, yes. I'm really interested in talking to Generation X, right? We're known as the sandwich generation now because a lot of us are in our 40s and our 40s, 50s. We're taking care of our parents, but some of us still have young kids at home. And so we're sandwiched between the two. When you're relying on a lot of Generation X specifically are taking care of their parents and don't necessarily have any additional family. I have a lot of friends that are actually in that space where additional family members aren't close by or don't have any at all. Finding a tribe of people to rely on, to turn to when you're in this, it's a rat race. It really is. Moment to moment. How can I make this next moment as better than the last? How can I keep it going? How can I keep them alive one more day? It's really important you find people in your local community that can help you. So there are a number of, if you are at a hospital, turn to a social worker, ask for a list of resources that will provide free opportunity, free transportation. There are a number of nonprofits that will send meals to you so that you can be fed as well. Some reprieve. We had grocery gift cards sent to us. I had a number of friends give me Instacart gift cards, which was phenomenal. I greatly appreciated that. There are resources. You just have to ask. So if you are alone in this, turn to your local hospital networks, your local churches, and ask for support. And of course, if you need more help, please reach out. You can comment here. I think my email is associated on this YouTube channel. You can always leave a review or comment on any of the social media platforms this podcast is on. We may have, when we took vows in sickness and in health, and in that moment, we had no idea what this was going to be like. Whether it happens to you in 3 years, like it did me, or in 30, it's still hard. And I'm here for you. Sending you a lot of love. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I'll see you next time. And as always, if you are a caregiver, please remember it's okay to have somebody else do the dishes. Until next time.